My stepdaughter told her friends at her graduation, "That's my mother's bedmate. He's more of a donor than a father." They laughed and mocked me. When I told my wife about it, she said, "That's more like the truth, just too blunt." What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Jane Staff from Minnesota. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I had never missed one of her milestones, not one. Not her dance recitals in middle school, not her college acceptance dinner, not even the emergency trip to the DMV when she lost her ID the week before she turned 21. I wasn't just the man who married her mother. I was her stepfather, and in my mind, that meant something. I gave rides at midnight, paid bills without complaint, bought groceries she never thanked me for. So when her college graduation rolled around, I wore my best suit, bought her a small bouquet, and showed up proud. The stadium buzzed with celebration, camera flashes lighting up like fireflies, families everywhere crying and clapping. I waited quietly behind a group of her friends, thinking maybe, just maybe, she'd acknowledge me in front of them. And in a way, she did. "That's my mother's bedmate," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "He's more of a donor than a father." Their laughter hit harder than any slap could. It wasn't just a laugh. It was a mocking chorus, a pointed and deliberate humiliation. I felt every eye shift toward me, their stares like cold needles pressing against my skin. The bouquet in my hand suddenly felt ridiculous, like a clown prop I wasn't in on. I didn't say a word. Just stood there as they turned their backs and walked away, the sound of their laughter echoing off the stadium walls like a cruel taunt. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. But something inside me cracked right down the middle. And what spilled out wasn't sadness. It was clarity. I didn't rush home. I walked. Took the long way through our neighborhood, past the park where I used to push her on the swings, past the pizza place she used to beg me to order from every Friday night. I kept thinking, was I just a bank account with legs this whole time? Had I imagined the thank yous, the Father's Day cards, the hugs that seemed genuine? Maybe those moments were real once. Or maybe I'd been fooling myself, playing a role I was never meant to audition for. By the time I got home, my hands were trembling, not with rage, but disbelief. I walked into the kitchen, where my wife was casually sipping wine, and I told her what her daughter said. Word for word. Her response cut even deeper. "That's more like the truth," she said, setting her glass down without looking at me. Just too blunt. I stood there, waiting for a laugh that never came. Not even a hint of irony in her voice. She didn't try to explain it, didn't rush to say her daughter didn't mean it. No discomfort, no remorse. She just shrugged, as if I'd finally caught on to a secret everyone else had already known. My mind reeled. This was a woman I'd been married to for over a decade. I paid off her credit cards, covered her mother's medical bills, kept us in a house she decorated while I worked overtime. And all of that, every sacrifice, reduced to donor, like a sperm bank on legs. I didn't even argue. I just walked upstairs and closed our bedroom door. Quietly. I didn't trust myself to speak. Not yet. That night, I logged into our accounts. Every shared credit card, every linked debit access, gone. I moved money, changed passwords, froze the ones she still had access to until I could do it right. It wasn't a rage move. It was surgical. I had trusted blindly for too long. I wasn't about to fund the life of someone who looked at me and saw nothing more than an ATM with benefits. As for her daughter, I stopped the rent payments. Cut off her monthly $300 upkeep. Phone bill? No longer my problem. I'd paid it for years. No thank you ever followed. Not once. I didn't even get a text. It was never about love. It was about what I could give. I didn't owe anyone an explanation anymore. The silence that followed was telling. No one asked what happened. My wife didn't confront me about the cards. Her daughter didn't call to ask why her phone service had been cut. I thought maybe they were giving me space. But I realized they probably thought I'd cool off and quietly go back to normal. The generous fool. The reliable man who never made a scene. But I wasn't cooling off. I was waking up. waking up to the fact that I had built a family on a foundation that saw me not as a partner or father figure, but as a convenience, a useful placeholder. And now that I was no longer useful, I was disposable. That realization didn't come with tears. It came with a sense of calm so heavy, I could feel it settle in my bones. I stopped trying to defend myself. Stopped replaying the graduation scene in my head. I stopped checking my phone for apologies that would never come. Instead, I started preparing for what came next. I wasn't going to yell or demand gratitude. I was going to walk away, with dignity this time. Let them figure out how to pay the rent. Let them explain to their friends why the donors stopped donating. I'd spent years being the backbone of a house that never truly saw me. That ends now. It was strange how quiet the house became once the switch flipped in my head. Not literally quiet. My wife still played her podcasts in the kitchen, the washing machine still hummed, and the neighbor's damn dog still barked like clockwork at 7 a.m. But emotionally, everything dulled. Where there used to be tension, now there was distance. I stopped asking about her day. Stopped wondering what the stepdaughter was doing in that overpriced downtown apartment I'd been paying for. The money had stopped, but more importantly, the energy had too. I had spent years investing emotionally, throwing kindness into a void and hoping it would echo back in some recognizable form. But now, all I felt was numbness. Not anger, not grief. Just a tired man who realized he'd been the only one taking this family seriously. That realization didn't make me cry. It made me reorganize my life. The next week, I sat down and made a list, not of chores or bills, but of every way I'd been financially supporting the two of them. Rent payments to her daughter? $1,500 a month. Cell phone plans? $220. Monthly transfers, just in case she needs something? $300. Streaming accounts, food delivery apps, gas money, tuition leftovers. I was bleeding slowly, month after month, under the illusion of love and responsibility. I totaled it up. In the last year alone, I had spent nearly $25,000 on a young woman who now referred to me as a donor. I stared at that number until the zeros blurred. I wasn't even mad about the money. I was mad at myself for needing their approval so badly that I let it happen. I had created this dynamic. I had enabled it. And now I was the one paying the emotional interest. That same evening, I cooked dinner for one. Just a simple salmon fillet and some roasted vegetables. My wife came home halfway through the meal, looked at the table, and raised an eyebrow. "You didn't make enough for two?" she asked, in that flat tone she used when she wanted to guilt me without sounding like she cared. I didn't look up from my plate. "Didn't think you'd be hungry," I said, "since I'm just a donor and all." She stiffened but didn't respond. Just went upstairs and slammed the door. That was the first night she didn't speak to me at all. Not even a passive-aggressive sigh or muttered complaint. I didn't mind the silence. It was more honest than the years of performative affection that had preceded it. The next few days followed the same rhythm. I got up, brewed my own coffee, skipped the usual Starbucks run for her. I left for work without texting her a reminder to eat lunch. I didn't check in about the grocery list or ask if her daughter needed help with her resume or if she'd paid her electricity on time. All that mental labor I used to carry like an invisible backpack. I dropped it, and nothing collapsed. They adjusted just fine, which only confirmed what I'd started to believe. I was never indispensable, just convenient. And now that I was inconvenient, I was being emotionally ghosted in my own home. But instead of feeling discarded, I felt lighter. There's a peace in finally realizing you've been used. It gives you permission to stop showing up. Around the second week, her daughter finally texted. The message was short and sterile. "My phone's off. What's going on?" I stared at the screen for a minute before replying. "Ask your mom." That was it. No explanations. No offers to help. If I was just a bedmate and a donor, then let her mother, the woman she modeled her coldness after, figure it out. 5 minutes later, my wife came downstairs holding her phone like it had personally offended her. "You turned off her service?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I did," I said calmly. "You didn't think to talk to me about that?" she snapped. "Wasn't my decision to make," I said, standing up. "Apparently, I'm not part of the family. Just the donor. Donations have ended." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. It's hard to argue with someone who's finally seeing clearly. That night, she tried to soften. made dinner, poured wine, sat across from me like nothing had happened. You've been distant, she said, not looking up from her plate. A lot's been going on. I nodded, but didn't elaborate. Let the silence stretch. Finally, she put her fork down. Look, maybe what she said was out of line, but she's a kid. You know how they are. I looked at her then, really looked. She's 23, I said, old enough to know better. And you, what's your excuse? She blinked, caught off guard. I didn't mean it like that, she muttered. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You meant it exactly like that. You just didn't expect me to listen. In the weeks that followed, I became someone I hadn't been in years. A man who didn't apologize for having boundaries. I started going to the gym again. Booked a trip to visit my brother out of state. I even met an old friend for dinner and realized how much I had missed being seen. Really seen. For who I was, not what I could provide. I didn't tell my wife about any of it. Not out of secrecy, but because I no longer felt obligated to report my movements like a teenager with a curfew. I was reclaiming pieces of myself I hadn't touched in over a decade. And each time I said no, to her daughter, to the silent expectations that used to shape my days, I felt more alive. It didn't take long for her daughter to stop pretending she was confused. She sent one last message. I don't know what I did to make you hate me, but this is childish. I didn't reply. There was no use explaining myself to someone who only saw value in what I could do for her. Love isn't about utility. It's about presence, respect, and honesty. I had shown up for her time and again, and when I needed just a sliver of grace in return, I got mockery. That's not a relationship, it's a transaction. And I was done transacting. It was a Sunday afternoon, one of those painfully quiet ones where the stillness feels heavy, like the air itself is holding its breath. I had just finished folding laundry, my routine now simplified to my clothes only. No more sorting through her delicates or matching socks that never had a pair. I liked the silence now. It wasn't loneliness. It was space, finally, to breathe. I was about to sit down with a book when I heard it. 3 sharp knocks at the front door. Not the kind of knock you use when visiting. This was the knock of someone who expected to be answered. I already knew who it was. I could feel it in my gut before I even peeked through the curtain. There she stood, my stepdaughter. Arms crossed, lips pursed, expression full of that inherited entitlement I used to mistake for confidence. It had taken her 2 months to come in person, but here she was. Probably thought she could do what her texts couldn't, shake me back into place. I opened the door slowly, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted the moment to feel as deliberate as everything else I'd done lately. She didn't even say hello, just brushed past me into the living room like she still lived there, like she hadn't insulted me in front of a crowd of her friends. Okay, what's going on? She demanded, spinning around with her hands on her hips. You cut me off without a single word. No phone, no rent, no money for groceries. You didn't even give me a heads up. I stayed by the door, letting her words echo through the house. For a moment, I just looked at her. Really looked. Same face I'd helped soothe after her first heartbreak. Same voice that used to call me Dad when she was in middle school and scared of the dark. And now, all I could think was how foreign she felt. Why would I give a heads up? I finally asked. You made it pretty clear what you think of me. She rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might stay stuck. That? You're mad about that? It was a joke. My friends laughed. Big deal. You're seriously punishing me over one sentence. Her voice rose, eyes wide with disbelief, like I was the crazy one. I felt my jaw tighten, but my voice remained even. It wasn't a joke. It was how you really see me. You said it without hesitation. And when I told your mother, she backed it up. So no, I'm not punishing you. I'm just accepting the role you gave me. Donors don't pay for phone bills. They don't pay rent. They donate and leave. She looked like she wanted to interrupt, but I didn't give her the chance. You've had 2 months to apologize. You didn't. You had 2 months to ask, to explain, to show an ounce of remorse. You didn't. You came here today not to make things right, but to get your perks back. She opened her mouth, and this time the anger poured out. You're being so damn dramatic. I've known you half my life. You helped raise me, and now you're acting like none of that meant anything. You're just walking away like some cold-hearted stranger. I stepped forward, and for once, I didn't sugarcoat my truth. Because that's what you turned me into. When you stood there and mocked me in front of your friends, you didn't think I'd hear it. But I did. And even worse, I believed you. I believed you because it explained everything. The dismissiveness, the entitlement, the way you and your mother both treated me like a convenience instead of a person. I showed up for you in ways your own father never did. But the first chance you got to define me, you called me a bedmate and a donor. That wasn't a slip-up. That was clarity. For the first time, she looked like she didn't know what to say. Her arms slowly dropped to her sides, and the edge in her voice gave way to something softer. Uncertainty, maybe even guilt. I didn't think you'd take it so seriously, she said quietly. My friends were joking around, and I didn't want to seem, I don't know, like I was soft. I almost laughed. That was the tragedy of it all. I had given everything to help raise a girl who thought loyalty was weakness and cruelty was strength. That's your mother talking, I said. She's been calling me useful behind my back for years, hasn't she? She didn't answer, and she didn't have to. The silence was confirmation enough. That's when my wife came home. Keys jingling, the doors swinging open. She paused in the entryway when she saw us. What's going on? She asked, eyes darting between us. Her daughter turned to her immediately, the mask going back on. He's cutting me off, Mom. Like completely. Rent, phone, everything. He's being petty over something I said months ago. My wife's face tightened, and I watched the moment she realized this conversation was already too far gone to control. She tried to play mediator, walking over and placing a hand on my arm. Can we talk about this upstairs? She whispered. I stepped back. No, I said. I'm not having any more closed-door negotiations. If she's old enough to insult me in public, she's old enough to be told the truth in the same way. The stepdaughter turned red, part embarrassment, part fury. So that's it. I'm on my own now? After everything? I nodded. Yes, you're on your own. I did what I could. More than I had to. But I'm not going to keep financing my own disrespect. Find another donor. She stormed past me, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the picture frames. My wife stared at the floor, silent. This is going to break her, she said quietly. I shook my head. No, this might finally build her. Then I turned and walked upstairs, not in anger, but in peace. That night, my wife barely spoke to me. She cried in bed, muffling it into the pillow like I was supposed to feel guilty. But I didn't. Not anymore. Her daughter had delivered the final blow, but it was her reaction, her cold agreement, her unwillingness to stand up for me, that made the damage permanent. This wasn't a phase. This was the beginning of the end. And while it hurt to admit that the life I'd built was crumbling, it also felt like I was finally letting go of something that had been broken for a long time. You can't fix a house when the foundation itself doesn't see your worth. It's strange how quiet can start to feel hostile. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was charged. Heavy. Every room in the house seemed to carry an echo of what had just happened. My stepdaughter stopped coming around completely, which I was more than fine with. But my wife? She lingered. Not as a partner, but as someone who resented my presence while needing the benefits of it. She stopped pretending, really. No more asking how my day went or offering a distracted kiss on the cheek when I came home. Instead, she started using silence as a weapon, a daily performance of disapproval. But that didn't bother me as much as it used to, because by then, I had already stopped looking to her for comfort. In fact, I was starting to accept that I had spent over a decade mistaking proximity for connection. We were in the same house, yes, but we were no longer in the same marriage. The days began to take on a mechanical rhythm. Wake up, coffee, work, silence, bed, repeat. The intimacy that once held us together had completely dried up, leaving behind something sterile and contractual. There were no more shared jokes or whispered conversations before sleep. No more spontaneous dinners or weekend getaways. Just two people orbiting each other out of habit and inertia. The only time she broke the routine was when she had something to complain about. The laundry detergent was wrong. The internet bill was late by one day. The trash hadn't been taken out. It was like she needed a reason to stay mad, to validate whatever silent story she was telling herself about me. And I let her. I let her do whatever she needed to do to avoid looking in the mirror. Because the truth was, she'd gotten comfortable having a husband who asked for nothing, expected everything of himself, and never questioned why he felt alone in his own home. One night, I came home later than usual. Not because of work, but because I'd started staying late at the office, taking long drives afterward just to avoid the suffocating energy that had taken root in the house. When I walked through the door, she was sitting on the couch, arms crossed, waiting like a warden keeping tabs on an inmate. "You've been staying out late a lot lately," she said, voice flat but sharp. I didn't bother making excuses. "I've been thinking," I replied. "About what?" she asked, even though I could tell she already knew. I sat across from her, not next to her. That gap between us felt wider than ever. "About how long we're going to keep pretending this marriage isn't dead." Her face didn't even twitch. No panic, no sadness, just that same hollow expression I'd been seeing for months. "So that's it?" she asked. "You're just giving up?" I shook my head. "No, I gave everything. I'm just finally noticing you didn't." The silence that followed was suffocating. She didn't defend herself, didn't argue, didn't cry. She just got up and walked away, her retreat louder than any fight we could have had. That's when it hit me. She didn't want to fix this. She wanted me to keep funding it, keep showing up, emotionally and financially, while she reaped the benefits without ever doing the work. I went to bed alone that night, but the bed didn't feel any emptier than it had when she'd been lying next to me, her back turned, her mind elsewhere. I stared at the ceiling and thought about every moment I had ignored my own discomfort just to keep the peace. Every time I'd convinced myself her coldness was just a phase, her distance just stress. I had been patient, loyal, devoted, and all it had earned me was resentment in return. The following week, I started gathering documents, bank statements, insurance paperwork, mortgage details. Not because I had decided to divorce her just yet, but because I knew where this was going. There was no trust left, no partnership. We were two strangers tethered by shared bills and old routines. I didn't say anything to her about it, but she must have sensed the shift. One evening, as I was leaving the home office with a folder in hand, she stopped me in the hallway. "What's that?" she asked, nodding toward the folder. I met her eyes. "Just preparing for the possibility of a life without this," I said. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. Instead, she turned and walked away again. That's when I realized she wasn't afraid of losing me. She was afraid of losing the lifestyle. And that distinction made everything crystal clear. To add insult to injury, I overheard her one night on the phone with one of her friends. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop. It was late, and I was walking to the kitchen when I caught the tail end of her conversation. "He's being ridiculous," she said. "He's always been too sensitive. I mean, yeah, I married him because he was stable, safe, but I never really felt that kind of love, you know." My heart didn't drop. It didn't even flinch. It just confirmed what I already knew but hadn't wanted to admit. She married me because I was a soft landing, a reliable wallet, a dependable man who wouldn't ask too many questions. And she had been right. I didn't ask. Not until it was too late. The next morning, I packed a small bag and left for the weekend. Drove 2 hours north to a cabin I'd rented last minute. No signal, no noise, no expectations. Just space. I sat by the fire with a whiskey in my hand and let myself feel it all. Not the sadness of a crumbling marriage, but the relief of clarity. The weight that lifted was unlike anything I'd known in years. I had spent so long trying to be everything to people who gave me so little in return, and now I was finally asking myself the right questions. Not how do I fix this, but why am I still here? Not how do I get them to see me, but why did I need them to in the first place? I returned home with a decision, not out of spite, but peace. The moment I walked through the door, I felt like a visitor. She looked up from the kitchen table, probably expecting me to apologize for disappearing. Instead, I placed the folder in front of her. "We need to talk about separation," I said. No dramatic fight followed. No tears, no screams. Just quiet acceptance, like she had already prepared for it too. And that, more than anything, confirmed I was making the right decision. You don't fight for what you love when you never valued it in the first place. Filing for divorce wasn't a dramatic event. There was no storm, no tears, no slamming doors. It was just paperwork, cold, methodical, and final. I stood in line at the courthouse with a manila folder tucked under my arm, surrounded by people who looked equally defeated. No one talks much in those lines. Everyone's there to admit something didn't work out, and there's a strange kind of solidarity in that. When it was my turn, I handed over the documents and signed where they told me to. 10 minutes later, I walked out into the sunlight feeling lighter, like someone had just unlocked a door I didn't realize I'd been trapped behind. I didn't text her to let her know I'd filed. She'd see the paperwork soon enough. She was the one who said she never really loved me. What did she care about how it ended? When the envelope finally arrived at the house, she didn't say anything for 3 days. No screaming, no pleading. Just that same eerie silence that had defined the last 6 months of our marriage. But on the 4th day, she snapped. I came home to find her sitting on the living room couch, legal documents spread out like tarot cards. She didn't even look up when I walked in. "You filed without even talking to me about the settlement?" she asked, voice low but sharp. I shrugged off my coat. "What's there to talk about? You didn't marry me for love, remember? You married me for security. So now you can figure out how to secure yourself." That was the moment her face cracked. Not in grief, no tears, but in disbelief. As if she truly hadn't thought I had it in me. "You're trying to leave me with nothing," she said. "After everything I gave up for this marriage." I almost laughed at that. "What exactly did you give up?" I asked. "You kept your job. You kept your friends. You kept your independence. I was the one bending over backwards to fill every emotional and financial gap you had. And let's not forget, your daughter lived off my money for 5 years without ever once acknowledging me as a real father. So no, I'm not sorry. I'm done being used." She tried to cut in, but I kept going. "You saw me as useful. You said it yourself. Well, I'm no longer interested in being useful to someone who sees me as disposable." That's when she shifted tactics. Her voice softened. Her body language changed. She leaned forward, placed her hand on mine. "Look, maybe we both made mistakes," she said. "But do we really have to tear it all apart like this? We built a life together. We can fix this." I pulled my hand away slowly, deliberately. "You had 6 months to say that," I told her. "You had 6 months to show you cared about more than what I provided. And in all that time, the only thing you fought me on was the money. Not the marriage. Just the money. So don't try to sell me on some redemption arc now. It's too late." We spent the next 2 hours going over numbers. She wanted spousal support. I showed her the text messages and call logs where she admitted to her friends that she never really loved me. I presented bank records, highlighted every dollar I spent on her daughter, on her credit cards, on her lifestyle. I had been too generous for too long, but I wasn't stupid. I documented everything once the cracks started showing. She went pale when she realized just how much I'd been carrying, and how little she could argue against it. By the end of the meeting, she signed the agreement with a trembling hand. She wouldn't be walking away with what she thought. Not this time. And then came the final confrontation, one I hadn't planned for, but one I should have expected. Her daughter showed up at the house again. She came barreling through the door like she owned the place, her expression twisted with rage. "You're divorcing my mom?" she shouted. "You're just walking out on both of us?" I stood in the hallway, arms crossed. "No, I'm walking out on a situation where I was never respected. That's different." She scoffed. "You're just bitter because I hurt your little feelings." That's when I stepped forward, closing the distance. "No," I said. "I'm done being degraded by the same people I fed, housed, and protected. You didn't just hurt my feelings. You confirmed that I was nothing to you but a wallet. So now that the wallet's closed, you're angry? Too bad. Go be an adult somewhere else." She didn't expect that tone. She looked at her mother for backup, but for once, my wife didn't come to her rescue. Maybe because she knew it was true. Maybe because she realized how much she'd lost. "You know what?" her daughter said finally. "You'll end up alone." I nodded. Alone is better than being surrounded by people who only clap when you're handing out favors. She stormed out. My wife went upstairs, and I sat in the living room, alone, but completely at peace. No more guessing games. No more walking on eggshells. Just stillness, and for the first time in years, it felt earned. In the weeks that followed, the divorce moved quickly. She didn't drag it out. Probably didn't want more of her skeletons paraded in court. She got less than she'd hoped for, more than she deserved, and exactly what was fair. I moved out into a smaller place across town. Simple, clean, quiet. The kind of space that didn't echo with tension. I kept my weekends open, took up biking, joined a book club of all things. People were surprised when I told them I was divorced. "You don't seem bitter," they'd say. I'd smile and reply, "Because I'm not. I just finally stopped betraying myself. I wake up now without dread." That might not sound like a grand victory, but to me, it's everything. For years, I opened my eyes each morning bracing for something. Passive-aggressive comments, sudden demands, financial surprises, cold silence that said everything she never had to. I didn't realize how much I carried until I set it down. The first few weeks after the divorce were quiet in a different way, less like tension, more like stillness. I'd make my own breakfast, sit at the kitchen table without someone else's chaos humming in the background, and actually taste my coffee. Peace doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it arrives in small, steady breaths, the kind you forgot you were allowed to take. I didn't tell many people about what happened. Just a few friends, my brother, and my boss, who'd watched me shrink into a version of myself I didn't recognize over the last few years. My brother, bless him, was angry on my behalf in the way only siblings can be. "I wanted to like her, man," he told me over lunch one afternoon. "But you always seemed exhausted around her. Like being happy was just out of reach." I nodded, stirring my drink slowly. Because it was, I said. I had spent years chasing emotional breadcrumbs, trying to earn affection from someone who saw every gesture as a transaction. My brother was one of the first people to say it out loud. "They never loved you. They just liked having you." That truth hurt, but it set me free. There's a grieving process, even when you're the one who leaves. I'd be lying if I said I never thought about what could have been. If she had been honest with me from the beginning, if her daughter had seen me as more than a resource, if we had actually built something real instead of something useful. But every time I feel that tug of nostalgia, I remind myself, I didn't walk away from a woman and a child. I walked away from a role I was never meant to play. I wasn't their partner. I was their provider. And the minute I stopped providing, the illusion shattered. That's not love. That's dependency. And I deserve more than that. We all do. Sometimes I still get messages. Her daughter sent me one a month after the divorce finalized. Just 2 words. "You happy?" I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I no longer felt compelled to explain my piece to someone who never valued it in the first place. My ex-wife reached out once, too. A short, vague message. "Hope you're doing okay." I didn't take the bait. I've learned that regret can sound a lot like compassion when it's convenient. But you don't get to play gentle once you've already played cruel. You don't get to circle back for comfort after burning the bridge and watching me drown. I pulled myself out of those waters alone. That means something. There's no dramatic revenge story here. No comeuppance, no karma that I've seen. At least not yet. But that's not what I was after. What I wanted was my life back. My clarity. My ability to look in the mirror and see a man who isn't bending himself into knots just to be tolerated. And that's exactly what I got. I spend my weekends reading again. I cook without being criticized for how I chop vegetables. I started painting, of all things, badly, but joyfully. The walls of my apartment are filled with the kind of mess that comes from real living, not curated appearances. I even signed up for a community biking group. Nothing fancy, just people who ride for the love of motion. That's all I want now: movement, peace, authenticity. I think the hardest part wasn't walking away. It was admitting to myself that I should have done it years ago. There were signs, dozens of them. But I ignored them because I wanted so badly for this story to work. I wanted to be the man who stepped in and made a broken family whole. And for a while, I convinced myself I had. But you can't fix people who don't see themselves as broken. And you can't love someone into loving you back. I gave everything I had to people who only measured me by what I could offer. And now, for the first time in a long time, I'm learning to offer something to myself. There's a part of me that still hopes her daughter finds her way. Not for me, but for herself. Maybe one day she'll understand what it means to be loved without conditions. And maybe she'll look back and see that's what I tried to give her. I don't need her to apologize. I don't even need her to regret it. But I do hope she grows up enough to treat the next person who shows up for her with more care. Because life will show her, eventually, that donors don't come around often. And the ones who love quietly, steadily, without asking for praise, they're the ones worth keeping. As for my ex-wife, I won't pretend I don't occasionally wonder how she tells the story. Maybe she paints herself as the abandoned wife. Maybe she tells people I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too emotionally needy. I don't care. Let her frame it however she wants. I know my truth. I know the weight I carried. I know the nights I stayed up doing the math on how to afford her daughter's next semester while they both acted like I owed them the world. I know the moment I finally stopped choosing a version of myself that kept everyone else comfortable. That version of me is gone, and I don't miss him. I live alone now, but I've never felt more surrounded by peace, by truth, by the quiet steadiness that comes from doing the hard thing. I lost a marriage, a stepchild, and a version of the future I thought I wanted. But what I gained was far more valuable: myself, my voice, my peace. And every time I think about what I walked away from, I don't feel bitterness. I feel relief. I feel gratitude for the man I've become. And I know this much now: peace isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the sound of your own breathing, unbothered and uninterrupted. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on what peace really costs and what it's worth. Have you ever stayed too long in a situation where you were only valued for what you gave, not who you are? Share your story in the comments below. I read everyone. And if you found truth in this journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real stories about family, betrayal, and finding your way back to yourself. Your voice matters, and so does your peace. See you soon in the next story.